This is Carbon Mike. Much of contemporary art is obsessed with the transgression of boundaries, the rejection of normality, and the mockery of the sacred. It wasn't always like this. In ages past, artists understood that one of their roles was to remind us of fundamental truths and sacred ideals. Bob Moran, formerly a political cartoonist for the Guardian newspaper and later for the Telegraph, is a husband, a father, a pilgrim, a soldier for the truth, an artist. It's through his art that most of us know him. It's also through his art that we've come to know not only his mastery of his craft, his keen eye, his razor-sharp wit, and his powers of observation, but also his sober respect for boundaries, his defiant embrace of normality, and his courageous love for what is sacred. It's through his art that he reminds us of what we never should have forgotten. A few days ago, he paid me the extraordinary honor of joining me as my guest on Dangerous Space. The very first thing I want to cover is how can people find your work online and or buy your work online?
Okay, so the best place to go is my website, which is bobmoran.co.uk, and you can see all my work on there. You can buy the original artworks and the prints, framed or unframed in different sizes. And if you go to the download page, you can download high-res versions of all my cartoons. If you're a publisher or of any size, if you have a magazine or even just a blog, a website, you can download the work free of charge and use it. And people can also find me on Twitter. I'm on Getter, Telegram, Instagram. On Twitter, I'm at Bob's Cartoons. I think on Telegram, I'm just under Bob Moran. I think I'm not very good at remembering all the different handles. But I'm on Facebook as well, just about. Facebook keep trying to kick me off, but I'm still just about on there.
Of course they do. That's Facebook for you. Some more of the preliminaries. Where were you born?
I was born in Somerset in the southwest England in the UK.
Where did you go to primary school?
I went to primary school in a tiny town called Chard in Somerset, just an ordinary state primary school.
And then higher education, or actually secondary school and higher education. Where did you go?
Secondary school, I went to a private school called Wellington School in Somerset. I wasn't meant to go there. I was supposed to pass my 11 plus and go to the grammar school. But my maths wasn't good enough. So my parents had to find some money they didn't really have and send me to private school, which I had a great time there. You know, I loved it. And I was kind of able to discover my love for satirical drawing and pursue that. And from there, I went to university to do a degree in illustration, which was kind of the closest thing I could find to cartooning. Although, you know, most courses don't really like you doing political artwork stuff. So that was quite hard. I was lucky to find one where they kind of recognized it as a discipline within illustration and allowed me to do that for the 3 years when I was there.
What did your parents do for a living?
My dad was a lawyer. He was a solicitor, mostly for the land registry here in the UK. He was the first person from his family to go to university, and so his parents basically said, you know, you either be a lawyer or a doctor, because that's the way things were back then.
Yeah.
And so he did law, and he always hated it. So he always encouraged his three sons to just find whatever we loved and we're good at and do that, which I'm very thankful for. We were very lucky in
Yeah.
that respect. My mum has done all kinds of different jobs. She had to work a lot, mainly because I failed my 11 plus and they had to pay for me to go to a private school. So yeah, my mum's done some teaching. She's taught children with special needs. She's worked for the police answering emergency calls. She's worked for the health service, all sorts of different things. Yeah,
Kind of a Renaissance family.
yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that I mean that it's funny how that phenomenon hits generation wise, right? My father worked in the construction trades,
Mm,
so he was, and my parents were both working class people. My mom was a registered nurse, so they were they were very much on the thing that your father's parents were on, right? Like you need to get out there and get a profession, you know.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and then when I was the first of my family to go to college, and when I did very badly, it took a long time to kind of get rid of that guilt and get myself together, figure out what I was going to do. Um,
you can understand it, can't you? Because
yes,
if someone you're suddenly in a position where your child has the opportunity to move up a rung of the ladder, if you like, if you want to see it that way, go to university. You can understand why they think, okay, we need it to be one of those professions where you're kind of guaranteed a career. Right?
yes,
If
sir.
you do the degree, you're going to have a job and you're going to be stable. Um, it's very much not what I did, and my brothers didn't do that. Because I think thing is, my dad is a very creative person. If it was nurtured in him, he would have ended up doing something artistic, I'm sure, either musical or drawing or painting. And so I think he just wanted that for us. He could see that the three of us we're all very creative, and he just wanted us to pursue that, no matter what, even though each one of us chose things that are really niche and really hard to succeed at. It must have been stressful for them, I think.
I mean, it's fortunate for you certainly, and I'd say fortunate for the rest of us that he did that. You don't always get that, with parents who come from that kind of solid working class aspirational tradition of, okay, do something practical, do something in the professions, move on up.
Yeah, it's one of those things where when you're younger, you don't quite understand that. You assume that everybody's parents are the same.
That's right.
Sometimes, you don't think there's anything special about your parents until you're older and you look back and you have all these people around you who were pushed into certain careers and aren't happy, and they'll say, "Oh, I always wanted to do this," but
That's correct. When did you first become aware that you could really make a living from doing illustrations and cartoons? I mean, you might have hoped that you could make a living, but when did you realize, okay, this is actually something that I can do?
That's a good question, actually. I mean, I I sort of knew from about the age of 14, very specifically, I want to get a job for a national paper doing political cartoons.
Mm,
And, and I was aware straight away that there was no set route into that, and that you're trying to enter a very tiny niche world, where there's maybe between 10 and 15 people in the country doing those jobs, and a lot of them, when they get the jobs, when they get those regular gigs, they're there well into their 80s. um, and it's not like, newspapers don't advertise really when they need a new cartoonist. It's very much word of mouth, and you have to be on their radar in the right place at the right time. So when I finished art college, university, I just worked for, I think, 3 years, 2 or 3 years. I was working in pubs and hotels and different jobs, and working, just drawing in my spare time. And I got the addresses of all the magazines and newspapers and editors in London, and I just send stuff every week, just speculative things. And often I wouldn't hear back at all. Sometimes you'd get an encouraging letter or email, but nothing was really happening. But what I also did was I would go up to London whenever possible if there was an exhibition or an award ceremony or something like that, and try to get to know the other cartoonists, who work for the newspapers. And sometimes I take my portfolio and get them to look at it, and became quite good friends with some of them. And so that was my way in. And in 2010, The Guardian one summer decided to do like a showcase of new talent. And they got a small group of like budding political cartoonists together and said, okay, we want you guys to fill in for our regular cartoonists over the summer when they're on holiday. And so I did that. So I had about, I think, 4 published in The Guardian that summer. And that was kind of like, oh, maybe this is it, maybe this is my way in. And I really enjoyed it. Actually, I was one of the only people in the group who finished that stint and said, yeah, I still want to do this, because, the thing is, when you do it for real, the pressure is immense, the deadlines and having to work with the editors and not being able to prepare anything at all. It just doesn't suit some people. There are some amazingly talented caricaturists, cartoonists who just don't want to work for a newspaper under those conditions.
Yes.
But I loved it, and I thought maybe this is it. But then nothing really happened for a few months after that. And I was actually at the point of becoming a teacher. I'd signed on to do my teacher training, and because I was thinking this has gone on for too long now. And while I was waiting for that to start, I was doing this horrendous job, probably the worst job I've ever had, just in terms of tedium, because it was this company that did surveys on office occupancy, and they were sending me to these huge offices of big companies, and I had to spend a few days there walking around, and I had copies of the floor plan, and I just had to record who was at their desk.
Wow.
And for how long. And I kind of thought, this might be it. This could be my career, just doing this.
Oh, man.
And it was so weird, actually. While I was there, I had this call from one of the other Guardian cartoonists who said, I've heard that the Telegraph might be about to need a new guy. So I think you should get in touch. So in my lunch break, I just wrote this email to one of the editors there, introducing myself, attached some pieces of my work, told them my views on politics and the nature of cartooning, the power of satire. And that afternoon, I had a call saying, yeah, we want you to come down and try out for this post at the Telegraph. And I suppose that was it then. I thought, because I always kind of knew if I can just get into one of these offices and have the chance, I can prove myself. So I guess that was the moment when I thought, I think I'm on my way now.
Wow. Now, what does trying out look like?
Yes. So the Telegraph newspaper in the UK were quite old-fashioned in the sense that they still demanded that their cartoonists work in the office. Almost all the other papers were, something that was done from home and had been for almost 10 years. But they still had a proper cartoon desk, and you had to be there, and you had to kind of go to the conference meetings and liaise with the editors. And obviously, I was, how old was I? 25 at the time. It was a very exciting place to be. And so basically, I had to go in for a couple of days and just do the cartoon, um, as you would normally. And so the other cartoonist who was there took me through the kind of practical stuff, like here's where you work and here's where you scan it, and here's the file sizes you have to do. Here's who you've got to file it to at the end of the day. Here's where the pub is. This is where you come to get your ideas. And I did that, and I mean, it went well, and I got the job. I was sort of then working, just doing 2 cartoons a week, to begin with. But I mean, looking back now, I was so underprepared. I still had so much to learn. Most of my skill set that I have now, I learned in those first couple of years working for the paper, not at university or school or anything else, because you can't learn this stuff unless you're actually doing it for real in a news cycle. It's not something you can simulate,
And when you talk about that learning curve, it sounds like you're not necessarily talking about a learning curve in terms of improving your draftsmanship or your color mixing. It's more like understanding how to approach a subject within the context of a news cycle. Like, what is that? What was it that you really needed to learn on the job as far as being a cartoonist for paper?
Yeah, I mean, that other stuff obviously develops as you go along.
Yes.
But it's very much down to you. Like the editors, the people you're working with, they're not concerned with how you do it. They're not concerned about your composition, the colors you're using, that kind of thing. They want the idea. They want it fast. They want it filed on time. They want you to be reliable. And so first of all, you're working for a specific audience, right? If you're at a newspaper, it has a readership, and those people have certain ideologies, political leanings, certain views. You've got to get to know the readership first of all. You have to know where to pitch your humor, which at the Telegraph, for example, very, very different from the Guardian, where I've done a bit of work before. Yeah. I remember on one of the first days, I brought some ideas to the editor on the comment desk, and he said, just to let you know, we don't do butt gags here. Okay, noted.
Right.
So that's the first thing. Then obviously you've got to get to know the editorial staff, the different characters. The different editors have different senses of humor. They like different types of cartoon. They kind of get certain cultural references. Some of them don't, and you've got to learn how to navigate that. And then the news cycle. You can't go in really with an idea of what you might do unless there's a big event happening.
Right.
Obviously, if it's going to be like a royal wedding or it's election day, then you kind of have a good idea. But most of the time, you go in totally blank, and you just start looking at the news in the morning, and you're kind of thinking, right, tomorrow when this newspaper comes out, what's still going to be relevant? What are people going to be talking about? What can I say about it? How do I say it in a cartoon? And that takes a long time to kind of get comfortable with. And I mean, the other thing is, back then in the early days, I look back now and I realize they really pushed me in the sense that I would do maybe 7 or 8 sketched out ideas, and they just say no to all of them.
Wow.
On purpose.
Yeah.
Because they wanted me to get used to that, and they wanted me to kind of have to wait until 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon sometimes, and then say, okay, you can start now. because they needed me to be fast enough, you know. And I look back at some of those early ideas and now, and I think these were really good.
Yeah,
they,
yeah.
they weren't rejecting them because they didn't like them. They were rejecting them because they were trying to get me used to the pressure of that.
That is
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah, so it's almost like a professional hazing period or weeding out period where they're trying to find out, can this dude handle the deadline pressure?
Right, because very often what happens is you'll agree on an idea for a cartoon at say 11 o'clock in the morning, and on average they take 4 or 5 hours. So you'll be 3/4 of the way through, a big story breaks. Someone runs across from the news desk and says, "Throw that away. You need to, it's no longer relevant. You've got to do something new."
Wow.
And so you've got to be able to think of something in about 5 minutes and get a new one done. And yeah, that deadline, it's interesting working to that kind of deadline where no matter what, you have to produce a finished piece of artwork at the end of every day.
Yeah.
By 6:30 in the evening. There isn't really any other area of art that's like that.
Yes.
And so now it's interesting now where I am because I don't have that anymore. If I want to now, I can spend a couple of days on a piece. And it's interesting because I still tend to work more or less at the same speed.
I was just going to ask you that. Yeah. Do you still work at the same tempo? And you find you mostly do, yeah?
It's actually quite rare that I think, oh, you know what, I'd like to spend a few hours tomorrow doing this and put a bit more detail in.
Right.
Especially if it's something, if a story breaks and it's big, you want to get something out as fast as possible.
Yes.
Still. Yeah. So I still have that speed, when I need it.
There's something kind of refreshing about that. I think preciousness is one of the besetting sins of artists, and maybe not only now, maybe that's always been the case, but
definitely.
But the discipline of having to get things out the door, I think, is good for artists. I think it was Olivia Butler, late science fiction author, who said that inspiration is overrated. What you need is discipline. It's like ideas are wonderful. They're precious things, but you have to have the discipline to kind of get yourself into the mood and figure out what you're going to do and produce and execute and get it out the door. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Preciousness is, you're definitely right. You can't afford to be too precious.
Yes.
About your art. You can't be too self-absorbed with what you're doing. And the thing is, when you're generating ideas, so you just got a piece of paper, I'll just sketch. Sometimes I won't even know exactly what the idea is, and I'll just start scribbling. Sometimes something comes out, and there's an energy to those because of the speed and because you don't have time to be precious and plan it. Yes. That some of those sketches have an energy that no matter how hard you try, you can never recapture in the finished artwork. But that's the thing about when you're up against a tight deadline, it still has some sense of urgency. Subconsciously, when people are looking at it, they can tell that you didn't spend 2 weeks painting it. That has a power, there's a power to that.
Yes, yes. There's something that gets communicated to the I don't want to say consumer, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's a bit different now because I have a slightly different audience, and my stuff kind of goes all around social media channels and pops up everywhere. But with a newspaper, when it's a daily newspaper, and it's not, most of what you do isn't going to be relevant the following day.
Yes.
And I remember like the first few times I saw somebody on the train or wherever flicking through the paper, and I knew they were about to come to my cartoon, and you're watching them and they give it a couple of seconds, and if you're lucky, they smile or they might give a little chuckle, and then they move on and start reading the column underneath. So you have a tiny window to capture them.
Yes.
And so you need to have that kind of energy. It needs to have that impact.
Yes.
And you can't afford to clutter it with unnecessary detail. It's all about that. That's another thing you learn, and it takes some time to learn, is how to whittle your ideas down, to distill everything down to an effective message that's really direct and that people can get just from a glance.
This is something I was going to mention to you because as you talked about working in these gigs, first that summer gig at the Guardian, then the Telegraph, it occurred to me that it's almost as if you're walking around with at least two sets of eyes, right? Like the ones in your head that actually look out at the world, and the ones in your head that look at what the other eyes are seeing. Do you see what I'm saying? And it's almost as if you're constantly processing what's happening, and kind of there's some kind of circuit there that ends up feeding ideas to your pen.
Yeah, you're right. You do end up looking at the world. There is a kind of a dichotomy there, I guess. It's sort of a split thing. How does my audience see this? How do I see it? I tend to think, I realized more recently that I think most of the time in metaphor, because I think that's because of my work, but I think I always did, and that's what makes me good at what I do.
Yes.
I tend to make sense of the world. So whatever I see going on around me and hear about, I will try and think of an analogy or a metaphor that's often visual. My brain doesn't work in a normal way, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's funny as you say, as you talk about thinking in metaphor. My ex-fiance was, or is actually, an anthropologist, and I remember she told me something one time. She said, I think we were talking about language, and she said something to the effect that it's actually metaphor all the way down,
Right.
So, but it's the question is always kind of at what level of the metaphor can you plug in? There's some places where you can kind of plug in, and all of a sudden you hit some kind of energized circuit that now lets you transmit something in a way that you couldn't otherwise.
Yeah, it's a weird thing where often if what you're trying to do is get people to see a truth that they're not quite seeing properly, even though it's happening right in front of them, if you transpose it into some kind of how can I show them the same thing in a different context, in a different way, with maybe different characters or a different setting? For some reason, that can cut through sometimes, and they'll suddenly realize what is in front of them and be able to make sense of it.
Yeah. The time we're living in now is interesting. I mean, getting back to your career, normal people divide history into BC, before Christ, and AD, Anno Domini. Sometimes I think our modern history can be divided into kind of BC and AC, right? Before COVID and after COVID.
Sure.
So 2010, Guardian newspaper, summer kind of artist program. You moved on to the Telegraph, and you were at the Telegraph pretty much until the great viral freakout, weren't you?
The great viral freakout. Yeah. Well, for 10 years.
Yeah.
And, I honestly, for a long time, I thought I would probably stay there for 40 or 50 years. it wasn't plain sailing for the whole 10 years. It was a bit of a bumpy ride. I went through, the paper itself went through a kind of existential crisis, like a lot of newspapers did, where they couldn't figure out how to make money in the world of the internet and 24-hour news. And during those early years, they were appointing different CEOs, and they had people over from America, and they, at one point they were trying to turn it into BuzzFeed. And I remember listening to these meetings of people going, top 10 lists, that's what we've got to do. Everything is a top 10 list. That's what people love. And some poor person at the back would say, I don't know if that's what Telegraph readers want. It's like, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
And I'm just there, listening, chuckling away. So they were tough times for the company itself. And then what happened was I went through a lot of different editors. And like I said before, the editors are all different. They have different senses of humor. They have different attitudes to cartoons. Some of them really value the cartoons. Some of them don't really. That's just the way it is. And so my position was quite vulnerable for a time. And I was messed around quite a lot. They kept cutting my pay and weren't really treating me that well. But by the end of 2018, I'd been told, just to go back a bit, I'd been told throughout my time there that you will never get a full-time contract here. Like, those days are over. No cartoonist will ever be given a full-time employment contract again. But by the end of 2018, I'd managed to get that. They agreed to put me on staff and pay me a decent salary and everything that comes with it. Wow. Which I was really thrilled about, obviously. And so then it's strange, because then I thought, well, now I'm definitely going to be here for a while.
Yeah.
And really it's because I'd achieved a lot in that time. In those first kind of 8 years, I'd won a lot of awards. I'd become very popular with the readership. I was selling, they were making a ton of money selling my prints to the readers, which they didn't give me any of, by the way. And it all seemed to be going very well. And even after the viral panic started, as you said, it was still going really well. I had my views on it from early on, and I made those clear. And most of my colleagues seemed to agree with me, and they were kind of like, "Yeah, we're happy for you to take this line and to point out the moral problems with what's going on." And I didn't get a lot of pushback from the colleagues I work with directly, or the readership, really. What then began to happen is, a lot at the same time, I was getting this completely new audience online, people who didn't read the paper and who'd never heard of me before, were finding my work because the other cartoonists were not taking the same line as me. They went in the opposite direction. So you suddenly start to get this completely new audience. And then just gradually there was this creeping unease. These little bits of friction started to spring up with other people at the paper who, on different desks, mainly on the science desk or the politics desk, who would start kind of little arguments with me on Twitter about things. And I got told, "Oh, people are complaining about you, behind the scenes, and but don't worry about it. It's fine. Just ignore it." But Yeah, I mean, I basically made a decision that I wasn't going to compromise my principles and kind of stay quiet on social media to protect my job, even though I really needed to keep my job.
Yes.
And I just, a couple of years before, achieved this amazing situation of having proper um, security with it that I never thought I'd get. And I have three young children. I got a mortgage to pay, family to support. So, but I just kind of thought this is too big. This is too, yeah. Like I've got a responsibility to my children, but first and foremost, that responsibility means fighting this
Yes, sir.
horrendous agenda with everything I've got. Um, so I didn't really heed the warnings. I guess um, I thought, well, I'll let them keep complaining,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not going to shut up. And there was a period. It was kind of fortunate in a way at the beginning of last year, 2021,
Mm-hmm.
right when the injection rollout started. Our youngest child was born, so I got 6 month paternity leave, which was great. So I just went off for 6 months, and I think that was good because I don't know, I think I may have left if I'd stayed,
Mm.
because I was under a lot of pressure from the December when the rollout started to do pro vaccine cartoons basically. And I said, look, I won't do anything anti it if you don't want, but I'm not drawing anything that's pro. Um, and that was awkward. And so then what happened in my time off was I just did a few pieces for myself and put them out. And interestingly, they were kind of got a lot more traction and were a lot more popular than the stuff I was doing for the paper. I had been doing for the paper, and I started to feel like I don't know. I'm not sure that it's the right thing for me to stay at a newspaper anymore. I was beginning to sense that I was turning into a different kind of cartoonist. Um, and then obviously, uh, I sent a couple of angry tweets um, at the end of last year, and ended up losing my job. They fired me anyway. So, which was kind of surprising and not surprising at the same time. As I said, there was a growing sense of tension, and I was aware that there were certain people who wanted me out. I knew some journalists had already demanded that they fired me before, um, and so I get you could say I gave them the ammunition they needed,
Yes.
but at the same time, the way it was handled and the way I was kind of treated in that kind of 2 week process of ultimately being fired did surprise me,
Mm.
because it was so
Coarse and ham-handed.
coarse and disrespectful, I guess, for somebody who'd been there for 10 years,
Yes.
pretty much longer than any of the people doing the firing had.
Right.
And there was no recognition really, and there was the thing is I've given an awful lot of my life to the company. I'd actually moved my whole family to the other side of the country because they insisted, even after 4 or 5 years that I work in the office. So we had to move house away from our network of support.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I had a lot of pay cuts and things, and I stuck it out, and I won a lot of awards, and I'd done some really personal work for them about my family situation, particularly concerning my eldest child. And again, they profited massively from that story. And so you kind of thought, well, I guess I thought they understand my situation. And they understand why I'm fighting these people,
Right.
you know, because it's directly threatening my child's life.
Yes.
So when I'm tweeting this stuff and arguing with these people, it's not in my capacity as a cartoonist or a journalist. It's as a father trying to defend his child. And, you know, the problem, I don't really know if it would have made a difference, but the guys who fired me were all corporate. You know, there were no editors. There was no one I'd ever even worked with dealing with it. So I thought, oh, maybe they don't know. So I explained it all. And yeah, they just said that's not relevant to this.
Wow.
You know, and that's kind of hurtful.
Yes. Yes. You know, as you were saying that, I don't know why I thought of this, but I thought about Tiananmen Square, funnily enough, and the fact that at first the students protesting in the square had actually greeted the PLA soldiers affectionately because they had been from the region, and then when the government wanted to really crack down and clean those people out, they sent a whole new detachment of soldiers in who weren't from the same area that the protesters were from.
Yeah.
So there was no social capital, you know.
Interesting strategy.
Yes.
I mean, it's probably procedure, I guess. Is probably how they do this stuff. But yeah, I had mixed feelings anyway.
Yes.
Because, as I said, there was already a sense that maybe it wasn't the right place for me to be anymore anyway. And, you know, sometimes you feel like somebody is
pushing you,
kind of sending you a signal, right?
Yes.
You know what, Bob, it's time for you to move on now.
That's right.
I know that, you know, I think you and I are very similar in our kind of spiritual, religious situation. I don't know if maybe you've moved on, but I remember your interviews with Reverend Jamie Franklin.
Yes, sir.
You described yourself as a pilgrim.
That's right. Still am.
Possibly on the road back to Christianity.
Yes,
and
sir.
That really chimed with me. I actually sort of said out loud, "Yes, that's me."
Yeah.
Because I kind of think if you've been through the last almost 3 years now and not had some kind of spiritual awakening or change, you're probably not doing it right.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 100%. I mean, on this pilgrimage, this is well, these are the kind of things that come to you, right? Because you meet other pilgrims on that path, right? And you exchange stories, Canterbury Tales style, right?
Yes.
And I've really, you know, you're talking about this last couple of years. We're talking about the great viral freakout, which is, look, government. We all know that government corruption is kind of a given. Right. There's, you know, there's a saying in Russia, I think it is that if you work with honey every day, no one will blame you if you lick your hands once in a while. We get that.
Yeah.
Okay. But what we've seen in the last couple of years is not normal. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Like this is, there's a cartoon of yours, and people will know it. People who know your work will know it. It's the mother. It's the mother standing in front of the giant kind of syringe-bearing ghoul with her daughter hiding behind her.
Yeah.
And, you know, that certainly resonated very deeply with me, and I know it did with a lot of people, but just think about how odd it is for something like that to resonate so deeply. I mean, that's normal. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, completely.
Like the idea of sacrificing yourself if necessary, dying if necessary for your children is normal. Okay? And we're living in an age where all of a sudden we have to really, it's like as a society, we've decided to do the opposite. We've decided to use our children as human shields.
Yeah, this is the thing I've said It's not simply that morality has been abandoned. In some
No, no,
cases,
no,
it
no,
has. It's
no.
it's been inverted,
Yes,
deliberately
sir.
inverted,
Yes,
which is
sir.
more horrifying in so many ways.
Yes, sir. That's it.
And
That's it.
like you say, we know that there are people high up in the world with money and power. We know they're corrupt. We know they're evil. We know they have been for a long time. And but ordinary people who just everyday folk who you've known your whole life and you live around. It took a few weeks of fear propaganda
Yes. All that took.
for them to totally invert their previous ideas of what was ethical, what was right, and they began to literally harm their own children
That's correct.
for this cause. Now, on the one hand, that shows the power of the propaganda and the kind of what the manipulation going on. On the other hand, it kind of suggests that actually all of this stuff was nowhere near as secure as we thought it was.
That is that's I think what it really shows, because again, propaganda is one of those things that you also get in any case. You get that as a side effect of a government that's large enough and that has an agenda of some sort. So I'm not. You could say that advertising really is a kind of propaganda. Okay.
Of course, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I take that on board as natural, but this is something else, and this is what I'm coming to, and I think which I'm curious to get your take on this. But talking about this spiritual pilgrimage, really this religious pilgrimage, I've come to the way I think about religion these days is primarily as a hierarchy of values. Right.
Yes.
As a not just a collection of values, because everyone has values. That's not a big deal. It's a hierarchy of loves, a hierarchy of values in a prescribed and fixed relationship to each other with a moral absolute at the top of the hierarchy. That's religion. And what you call the absolute is a separate matter. And what those values are, that's a separate matter. But it seems to me that if you take that view, if you take that definition of what religion is, then what our problem during the great viral freakout has been that we have lost our religion, meaning we no longer have a way to reason about these things, to read, not to simply say what we think is right and what we think is wrong, but to reason about right and wrong. We've seen people who tell us ad nauseum, my body, my choice, bodily autonomy. Bodily autonomy has to come before everything, before common decency, before, doesn't matter, And then these same people did a complete about face in the wake of government saying, no, we want you to go and we want you to run this experiment on yourself for our friends in Big Pharma. And they were like, okay, no problem. And that's not so that's not just propaganda. That's the fact that your values are just, you hold your values like a deck of cards, and if a situation comes up, you just shuffle the cards. Sorry, go on.
Well, exactly, and they then turned right around again and did another 180 almost immediately with the abortion argument.
Yes, exactly.
And it's so, you think we can't discuss things like this. We can't survive as a species with this kind of moral confusion and hypocrisy and just switching from one to the other, depending on what the news story is. I mean, they're not the same. That the abortion issue is different in a lot of ways to the vaccine issue, and in some ways it's similar, but it's just that thing of people just like opening their wardrobe in the morning and saying, what principles am I going to wear today?
That's exactly. And look, that's what you get when your values are not in a hierarchy. When there is no structure to them, Oh, let's see. Okay, it's like you're playing solitaire. You just pick a card and flip it over, and flip over another one, no problem. So this is and you begin to understand, or at least I've begun to understand. When people of the faith, when men of the cloth, when theologians talk about religion being necessary, the naive response to that is that, well, of course, people who are not religious or who are atheists or what have you can be good people and do good things. And of course, that is true. And of course, people of no faith, people of faith can do terrible things. And that's also true. But as a society, I've found that the only thing that explains to me our inability to reason about morals is this kind of destruction of that structure of that, and that, I'm sorry, that's a religious structure. It's not a political structure. It can't be, because then you couldn't reason about whether a law was unjust or not. It's not political.
It's certainly not a scientific structure.
Yes,
either.
sir. That's right. Exactly.
That's also one of my another favorite quote of yours when you were saying about all these things that were scientific questions at the beginning.
Yes.
But then you reach what is this? Where's it come from?
Yes.
Who's it going to affect?
Yes.
Can we treat it? Can we not treat it? And then you reach the point of what should we do about it?
Right.
Which is not a scientific question.
Right.
And I love that. I thought that was so true. Such a simple way of putting it, and an effective way of putting it. And yeah, there's been this idea that's been growing over the last few decades of we're a scientific people now, and science has made religion redundant, or it's a battle between science and religion.
That's right.
You kind of think one of the things that all of this has shown at the very least, is that, like, my God, we need both to act as counterbalances to the other, at least, minimum, that the ideas of science can only cover so much. They can only take us so far. The problem is they then start to try and reach into the domain of religion.
That is correct.
And you need religion to step in and go, no, actually, no, we'll take it from here. Or,
that's right.
That if you don't want to call it religion, the moral hierarchy that you're describing,
right?
People might be more comfortable talking about just that moral hierarchy, yes. Those moral truths that are supposed to be ingrained and absolute, and that hasn't happened. And one of the disappointing things is that so much of religion didn't step up to the plate.
Yes.
They didn't say, whoa, hold on, this is where we come in.
Yes, that's correct. That's
because
correct.
What you're proposing to do is not right. It doesn't make sense ethically, and they didn't.
That's correct.
Loads of the most amazing people I've met since this started and who've come into my life and helped me have been Christians.
Yes.
That's fascinating to me. And a lot of them I've met completely by chance. However, I also know that loads of people who profess to have very strong faith have been a total letdown, and they haven't got it at all.
Yes. Yes.
So it's interesting. Within the world of religion, it's a mess.
Yes.
Because of what's happened.
Well, that's correct. I mean, I think, certainly, for example, Father Jamie has gotten all kinds of pushback for saying perfectly normal things. Things that were not remotely controversial a generation or two ago.
It does make me reflect very differently on the story of Christ.
Yes, yes.
That happens. I used to be a huge fan of Christopher Hitchens in my 20s.
Me too. Yep.
When I was a pretty staunch atheist.
Yes.
I still like listening to him because he's just such an incredible speaker.
Yep,
and he's
so spicy.
So spicy, yeah.
Yeah.
And sadly, I don't think he'd have been on our side in this. I think he would have gone, with Dawkins,
yes,
and Bennett and Sam Harris, because he was so loyal to the science. I think he would have followed the science, unfortunately. But anyway, so much of what he said used to make sense to me, and I wasn't an aggressive atheist, but I would always enjoy a debate. with religious people, you know, in my kind of mid-20s.
Yes.
And one of the things that Hitchens would always say that made sense to me was he would point out how ludicrous it is to think that, you know, the human race had existed for, say, 100,000 years minimum without this knowledge of ethics and morals.
Yeah.
And that when somebody comes along and starts saying these basic things like love your neighbor, you know, put your children first, be humble, don't treat other people like you want to be treated, that this would be any kind of revelation to people.
Yeah.
That people wouldn't have just been stood around shrugging their shoulders going, you know, we know that.
Yeah.
Like, you know, tell us something useful. And almost as soon as, very early on in all of this, I suddenly thought, wow, if anything like this was going on then, of course,
right,
what he was saying would have been seen as dangerous and shocking, and would have been news to people, because we've seen how quickly those things get forgotten.
Well, that's the interesting thing, right? I mean, you know, people living centuries ago obviously didn't have all the modern conveniences, right?
Yeah.
We have all the modern conveniences. So my question, you know, in light of that is, what the hell is our excuse? Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's the thing that really started to get on my nerves with this thing. It's like, wait a minute now, hang on a second now. You know, most places you live in the West, okay? With a few exceptions, you can go, like, the water will not kill you, okay? You know, there's some cities where the water is bad, but overall, the water won't kill you. Jesus Christ, you can go down the street and walk into a climate-controlled room and hand somebody some scraps of paper and they'll give you food. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It's like you don't have to worry about death from exposure or death from wild animals or death from any number of crazy diseases that were killing people up and down and left and right centuries ago. Okay? And you have indoor plumbing and you have the internet. And you people can't hold it together. You people can't hold it together because of a respiratory virus. Really? So that goes to your point. It's like, no, these things, human beings need to be reminded of these things because of what we are, because of how fragile we are, because of how dangerous we are when we get into groups. You know what I'm saying?
But that's I mean, that's a good point what you say about how fragile we are. This, for me, is the other key thing about what religion does, the role religion performs.
Yes, sir.
Pretty simple thing is it facilitates a mechanism by which people can talk about and deal with the concept of death.
Yes, sir.
Which nothing else really has been able to do in the same way. And definitely science has never really even attempted to deal with this.
Right.
And I think it's been lost. It's even been lost within the world of religion in recent years.
Yes.
That this idea that death is just something we can't cope with, and one of the main driving forces behind this madness has been the idea that our government and all of us must do everything we can to prevent death, but crucially one type of death. You know?
Right, that's right.
And you think that is such an incredibly dangerous idea.
Correct.
I mean, a lot of people seem to think now that that's a government's role, is to just stop people dying wherever they can. And you think, do you have any idea how mad that is? If that's actually what...
Right, even to what you said, correct, and even to prevent suffering. There's people who think the government's job is to prevent suffering even. So now you're not supposed, if anyone suffers, it's a problem, not just a problem, but something the government has to intervene because of. This is madness. This is a kind of madness. You know?
Yeah, and I just think that ability that I guess, like you were saying, maybe when death was much more apparent to everyone every day, all
Yes.
around them,
Yes.
um, it, they had to contemplate it deeply, and they had to find a mechanism by which they could deal with it,
Yes, sir.
and just accept it as part of life. I mean, when you try to say to people, look, I mean, come on, the average age of death is 82.4.
Right.
And most of those people already have Alzheimer's, heart disease, cancer. And you'll say, you know what happens when people get old, they get ill and they die. That's not news. That's been happening every day of your life. But for so many people, it was as if this had never happened before. It was like somehow old people didn't die before.
That's correct.
And it's you think there's definitely a connection here with the kind of loss of religion.
Yes, there
and
is.
the dominance of science, that we've lost this ability to deal with death.
Well, thinking, I remember when I was talking to Father Jamie, he talked about the idea that theology is the queen of sciences. That idea certainly predates this notion of kind of non-overlapping magisteria. You have science over here, religion over here, and you can. Well, I think before the great viral freakout, I was much more with the atheists, even though I had started to reason my way back into faith slowly. I think Jordan Peterson was kind of a gateway drug back into Christianity for me. But
me too. Yeah.
But when I stopped buying into the kind of the cheap grade school criticisms of religion, and I started looking at what serious thinkers have thought about these things over the years, then I realized that there's certainly a sense in which science is downstream from religion. Once you have a concept that the universe is the product of a rational mind, that implies that you, a human being gifted with reason, can then make sense of the universe,
right?
Using the instrument of reason. But that's only possible if the universe is the product of a rational mind in the first place.
If it's all just random happenstance and that's hurling itself to oblivion and destruction.
Right. Exactly. Then how are you able to comprehend it? How was your mind able to exactly?
There's an interesting idea about I can't remember what book I read this in, about evolution. Kind of trying to frame evolution in a spiritual or from a religious perspective.
Yes.
It talks about I actually think it's from the sequel. It's the sequel novel to The Exorcist called Legion, which is actually, it's a really good book actually, and it focuses much more on those theological ideas. It's less horror orientated. Anyway, and there's a passage in that talks about how this idea that the universe is chaos and darkness and destruction. Everything is hurling itself in one direction, which is to destroy itself.
Yes.
Eventually, everything is supposed to collapse.
Yes.
And die. And in the middle of it, you have this tiny little thing going the other way, which is essentially us.
Yes.
It's the life on this planet.
Yes.
Is going completely against that trend.
Yeah.
That means something. There's
That's
a significance to that.
That's right. It means something. It's meaningful. I'm so glad you cited that. I hadn't even known that there was a sequel to The Exorcist, but you hear a lot of atheists, militant atheist types say they cite the scale, as a reason why religion makes no sense, right? So scale is supposed to be their big counter argument, right? Well, look at how big the universe is, and look at how small human beings are. Look at how small Earth is compared to everything else.
Yeah.
But in a way, that's a very crude and kind of sloppy argument. Why should that make a difference? Look how small a virus is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
And look how much you freaked out about it these past 2 years. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah, good point.
Right?
Uh,
So scale is not necessarily the
well, I'm
thing.
not sure most of them don't understand quite how small viruses are meant to be. That's why they wear their masks, you
Don't start. Let me breathe through this tennis racket and filter
Yeah,
out this.
yeah.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, it's yeah. I have to say, I mean, I've seen a couple of a couple of the interviews you did, or the segments you did for this documentary about your work, and I know you have that kind
Mm.
of Englishman's reserve. You don't really like a fuss to be made about things about you. But I have to say that I mean, I hadn't really known about you before the great viral freakout. I remember when I started looking at your work, I just thought, wow, there's someone out there. There's someone out there really fighting for us, with us. It's one thing to feel like you're besieged, but it's a different and maybe better thing to feel that you're in a city that's under siege. And you can
Yeah,
look to your left and you can look to your right and you're like, all right, well, here we all are, you know?
yeah, exactly.
Um,
But you know what? I'd never. Um, how can I put this? I didn't set out to be that guy,
I know
if
you
it
didn't.
makes sense. It was not planned or orchestrated. I kind of just kept drawing what I thought was true, and just, like, again, what should be normal for a lot of people, didn't abandon my principles and things. And for so long, even like 6 months into it, it was like I kept turning around and expecting to see all my old friends and colleagues like running after me.
Yeah.
Like, oh, and they weren't there. And there's a few other great people, cartoonists doing good work as
Yeah.
well, but not many. And it's, yeah. So I guess it's kind of happened by accident in a way. Um, I get I'm overwhelmed by the reception my work gets and how much it means to people.
Yes.
But also the kind of support and love I get back for it, especially when I went through losing my job. The kind of, obviously, you get the abusers and the trolls kind of crying victory, and
Yes.
they've got rid of you, and they think, but I had hundreds and hundreds of messages from people all over the world, basically saying, we've got your back.
Yes.
And also, I think importantly, saying, please don't stop.
Yes.
It was kind of the most moving thing. They were like, we you can't stop because we need you. We need what you're doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I never expected this, like if you stay as a newspaper cartoonist, you're kind of well known within a readership, and then maybe once you get very old, some other people in the country where you work might know who you are, but your work's never really going to have a kind of global impact. Or most people might recognize your work. They may not even know your name. So my career's gone in this completely other direction now, as the world has changed.
Yes.
And some days I'm still kind of struggling to catch up with that. It still overwhelms me, and I just hope I can keep going. I hope I don't run out of steam or run out of ideas. I mean, there's no sign of it at the moment. There's a growing sense in me, an understanding of like, oh, I don't think I was supposed to go and be a newspaper cartoonist. I was sent here to do this now.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And it's very hard to say something like that, because it can sound incredibly arrogant and self-important. I don't really mean it like that. It's just this sense of purpose, of like, no, this is the thing I'm supposed to be doing with the skills I've been given, that are really quite random.
Yes.
And specific things, that I can do.
That's right.
And especially in terms of like the the emotion I'm able to put into my work
Yes.
when I want to. I don't really know where that comes from. That's not something I learned ever, and again, it wasn't that useful doing gag cartoons for a newspaper, but all of a sudden, you kind of think, oh, that's why I have that ability as well, because now it really matters.
That's correct. That's correct. And by the way, for the record, I don't think it is arrogant or self-serving to say you were sent to do something. I think the fact that people often perceive it as such is a sign of how degraded our spiritual thinking, our moral thinking, our religious thinking is. Of course you serve something outside yourself.
Yeah.
Of course you do. In other words, it's no more arrogant to say I was sent here to do this at this time than it is to show up at someone's house with a toolbox and a pipe wrench and say I was sent here to fix the drains.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right? You don't think, who do you think you are? Mr. Plumber, right? Exactly.
Yeah. Get off your high horse.
Exactly. Sorry, I thought your sink was leaking. Right? So that's right. So it's because our thinking our moral thinking has been degraded so much that we can even, as we say, fix our faces to say, oh, that's arrogant to think you were sent here. Of course you were sent here to do something.
But this is what's under attack. This is exactly what they are trying to strip people of.
Yes, sir.
Is this sense of a higher purpose, of inner meaning, of basically of I have a soul and it's on a journey, and my existence is more than just a functional mechanical thing where that's what technocracy is.
Yes.
In its true essence. Beneath that surface thing of, it's a society governed by technology where all the tech experts are in control. Like beneath that is a philosophy that human beings themselves are machines and nothing more, not even animals. They are programmable machines. You don't have any soul. There's no higher purpose to your time here. You can be programmed. You walk about, you can be thrown away if you're not useful. That is, and really, it's not quite fascism, communism, socialism. It's this different thing, this technocracy thing that kind of, I think, began in the 1930s, is when the people kind of first put forward this idea, and it's definitely where we seem to be heading.
Yes, sir. And what's interesting,
it's like religion has the antidote to that.
That is absolutely correct. That is this is what Chesterton talks about. When he talks about the sacred human ideal, which is a phrase I've kind of unabashedly stolen from him. Yeah. I don't have a prescription for what our mode of social organization should look like, but I can tell you that any mode of social organization and any mode of economic organization, any economic philosophy, any political philosophy that disregards the sacred human ideal is worse than useless. And so we can talk all day about this kind of ism and that kind of ism. I mean, I'm now of the opinion that capitalism and communism were never really opposites. No. They're kind of kissing cousins. And it doesn't, there's a certain generation of people or a certain category of people who like to give you a jump scare by saying the word communism. Well, the fact is, I don't want to be instrumentalized by the state, but I don't see why it's any better for me to be instrumentalized by Pfizer.
Right.
Working in conjunction with the state. It's the same goddamn thing, right?
Yeah, completely.
So that's a problem, and we're not going to get right. To me, it's like what you were saying earlier. We have to get right with this, and when you the pattern I've been noticing in the things you've been talking about as we've been speaking has been about energy and relationships, and I'm always thinking in terms of feedback loops and things like that. I think about what you were saying earlier, how there's an analogy there, right? In the same way that when I hear my Christian friends talk about life, because they have radically accepted meaning as the default, okay, everything is lit up for them. And it's not to say that every day is good for them or they don't have suffering or trouble. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that they're capable. They have an operating system that lets them walk around and see other human beings, right? And they're lit up from the inside.
Yes.
They're not just meat. You see what I'm saying? In the same way, there's an analogy of like, you're talking about, earlier you were talking about how people relate to your work, you know, like the guy on the train reading The Guardian, and he's looking at a Bob Moran cartoon, and you've got maybe a couple seconds, you know. Now when we see a Bob Moran cartoon come up in our Twitter feed or whatever, we're experiencing that work that you did in a different way. It's not just something you thumb past or what have you. It's not like that. Everyone who knows your work knows exactly what the hell I'm talking about.
I think part of that as well is that, like I explained before, if you work for a newspaper, it's never 100% your work.
That's right.
There will always be somebody else's input on some level. I mean, sometimes to the extent where if you have a particularly a bad and annoying editor, they will just say, "I want you to do this idea."
Yes.
And it will always be crap, and your job is then to somehow make it work.
Make it work.
But now it's everything I put out is entirely me, and in that sense, it's kind of a part of me. It's 100% my worldview, my personality, my kind of energy in that. Which is incredibly satisfying. I mean, there's pressure with that as well, because you're suddenly like, there's no excuses anymore. I can't hide behind anyone else.
That's right. That's right. There's a different kind of circuit being completed now, and it's being completed in a different way. Okay. Yeah. And what flows back and forth is different. And again, the meaning, you know, every line. I remember that documentary that they did about you, about your work. You know, people were talking about how every little thing, you're looking at all these details in the cartoon as if you're trying to absorb them through your skin. That's kind of what happens when people's understanding of things kind of jumps a level. And when I say understanding, the way they relate to it is what I'm saying. One thing that the great viral freakout has done, it's changed relationships, obviously. Yeah. And many of those for the worse. But some, as in the case of you and what you found to be your natural audience, some of those relationships for the better.
Yeah, definitely. We've been through a time where those of us who can see it for what it is and understand the desperation and urgency of the situation, there's such a yearning, such a desperation for somebody else to just reach out and touch someone else.
Yes, sir.
Who gets it. And on any level, you know, if you just meet someone sometimes on a train or something and get chatting, and you, when you realize it's like a magic moment. Yes. And I don't remember there's never been something quite like it. You know, it's not the same as, say, meeting someone who supports the same sports team as you, or so. It's more than that. It's much deeper than that, precisely because this covers everything. It's all encompassing. It's the essence of life. It's, you know, what do you think human beings are supposed to be?
Yes.
So there's a real power, and I think, that's, I guess, a lot of my work, it's like a release for people. It's a rather a relief. I think maybe a lot of the emotion tied up is just relief of like, oh, thank goodness he's put what I'm feeling in this work. He's distilled it down into an image, and then they can share it as well. That's the other thing, that they can share it with people. They can use it, maybe to argue a point. Sometimes it's like giving people a grenade to chuck into an argument online. I mean, I don't know exactly what the right way ultimately of fighting this is. I think we've exchanged some tweets about this before. You know, I remember when you said to me, I was annoyed about somebody or other, And you said we have to fight with the army we have, not the army we wish we had.
Yes, sir.
And I thought, oh, God damn it, he's right. That's such a good point. And it's very difficult because, like, I don't know what the answer is ultimately. What we can or should do. I feel like there's a phase, maybe that we're still in, which is just making people aware that they're under attack, right?
Yes.
Because that's what's happening. Everyone is under attack.
Yes.
And the problem we face is most people don't even know. It's completely weird, unconventional warfare where people, not only do they not know they're under attack, but actually the method used is to just convince people to destroy themselves. Like, the enemy doesn't actually attack you. They tell you to go and wreck your own life, to comply with these things that will ultimately destroy you. And it's like, we can't do anything until enough people understand that is what's going on. And so, maybe you shouldn't worry about what comes afterwards. I don't know whether there's this idea in the whatever you want to call it, the awake movement, that what needs to happen is we kind of go off and just do our own thing and kind of form parallel societies. I don't know, build communities. And I don't know how I feel about that. I have a number of problems with that. I mean, partly because, first and foremost, I'm not sure that they're going to allow it or that it will be possible. I mean, if you look at what's going on in New Zealand right now, where they've just basically made it a terrorist offence to question the government,
right,
or not obey government rules, and encourage people to inform on their neighbours and things. If they're doing this, you think, well, how are you supposed to go and set up some parallel community if that's happening? But also, it just, maybe it's different if you don't have children, but I don't like the idea of, let's say it's possible. Okay, let's say that we can go off. Maybe we buy an island somewhere and we all go off and live in the kind of community we want with the values we want. But the rest of the planet goes to hell.
Right. Are we happy with that? Right.
Are we happy with that? Do I want to die knowing that my children are confined to this one place?
Right.
Because if they step outside of it, it's a dystopian nightmare. No. Like, I want to know that if we had any chance of stopping this for everyone, including the people who've complied, including everybody,
yes,
we have to take it. We have to figure out what we can do and try. That's my view.
That's exactly right. I think I very much dislike this whole thing of let's go out on let's go find an island, let's go do this. I mean, first of all, people don't know what's involved in these things. Most of us really don't know what it's involved, what is involved in being a farmer, for example, in having to make everything that you use. You know what I'm saying? In having to generate your own power, and then separate from all those prosaic concerns, this is not. I'm sorry, that is not the prescribed relationship. That's not how we're supposed to relate to each other as human beings. No. That just strikes me as fundamentally theologically wrong. You see what I'm saying? And it's like, I'm not a theologian. I don't want to step on any toes, but it seems to me that the new commandment is that we love each other.
Yes.
And it seems to me that, like, now love doesn't always mean talking, it doesn't always mean happy talk, right? Sometimes we may have to curse each other out, okay?
Right.
But the new commandment is that you love each other, okay? And to me, it's that or die. Yeah. It's as stark as that. In other words, it's you either you are on the side of the sacred human ideal or not. That's what I'm saying. And so there is no going off grid. There is no off grid. No. The grid will expand and find you and take you out. That's what will happen.
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, think about it. It's like you think the whatever global complex you want to get, you think they can't fly to a little island, really? You think they can? What are you talking about? Right? So there's none of that. We're not going to be excused from the duty of loving each other and from the duty of seeing each other in a certain way. Again, it doesn't mean happy talk. It doesn't mean singing kumbaya. Nothing like that. It means it's difficult and it's dangerous and it requires courage, right? That's the thing. Like loving your neighbor requires courage.
Yeah. It comes back to this thing of like, what, having been sent here for a purpose.
Yes, sir.
It's that responsibility of like, this group of us who understand and can still see, who haven't succumbed to whatever it is, the brainwashing, the propaganda, or whatever dark spells they've weaved, whatever it is, we have somehow been spared for whatever reason. Well, the reason has to be that we try and stop it. It's not. I don't think we would end up feeling very satisfied if we just run away.
That's
and
correct.
Leave everyone to it, because there are victims. That everybody. I know it's hard because there are different levels of compliance. There are people who have just fallen for the whole thing. There are people who kind of get it but can't be bothered. They're kind of just apathetic. They don't see any point. There are other people who have actively, celebrated it and attacked those of us. But really, they're all victims because it's going to destroy all of them. And so I may not want to see some of them again. I've lost friends and family.
Yeah.
But I'm still fighting for them.
That's
correct. I still don't want them to end up in this hell that we're headed towards.
That is correct.
I think we got to find a way. I mean, I don't know what it is. I don't know whether the existing system can be rescued, or taken and used, because part of me feels like the system really has been built to do these things, to oppress us. So it's like, people talk about starting new political movements and using democracy and fixing it. I don't know. It seems, on the one hand, it's like, I don't know if that will work, and also it's like I don't know if we have time. This is urgent.
Yeah,
we are running out of time.
Yeah, I mean it's funny. I'm often telling people that this will be at least 100-year long war.
Yeah.
But time is still of the essence. You're right. We definitely have to change our relationship to terms like democracy. I'm not a fan. There are all these people who say, well, democracy doesn't work. I think that's silly. Democracy is an instrument. It's not perfect, and it is for certain things. It has a certain purpose. And if you try to cut down a tree using a hammer, you will be convinced that a hammer doesn't work either, because you're not trying to. So the things democracy is not supposed to do. Democracy is not going to make all men good and happy. Democracy is not going to restore our religious feeling, our religious relationship to each other. Democracy is not going to enable us to reason about morals.
Yes.
Because no political system, that's not what it's for. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
But I like the idea of looking around. Okay, what instruments do we have? What are they for, and how can we use them? What can we build with them? That's I think at the end of the day, I think civilization is like a house that we all live in that's always falling down and always being renovated. That's just the nature of it. So we're never going to, quote unquote, fix everything. The goal is to keep all the systems running for long enough that we have the luxury of handing our kids a house where they get to solve better and higher quality problems. That's progress. That's progress, right? So you're not going to fix everything. It's like it's never going to happen. That's not how it is, right? But what we can do is we can enable our kids to solve higher quality problems. If our kids are solving the same problems we are, that's how we'll know we've failed.
Right. It's like don't worry about handing your children a world where there are problems to fix. Focus on giving them the right tools and the agency in order to be
Yes,
able
sir.
to fix them, right?
Yes,
That's what you
sir.
should care about.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All we got to do is keep these people from killing us all. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And then,
just a small
and
matter of
the
that.
small matter of that, and yeah, then we'll be on to something. But I really do think that's a better way to think about this thing, because we have to ultimately, in this fight, if every 5 minutes we're freaking out over this or that political cycle, or this or that new political philosophy, or this or that nostalgia cycle. Oh, we have to bring back monarchies. It's like, listen,
Mm,
no political system will inoculate you against moral error.
yes.
It cannot happen. That's not how human beings work. And especially,
No.
and Christians especially should know that, because original sin is baked in right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, so we
Yeah.
should know this, right?
Yeah.
So we have to think as builders and as growers. That's the way I think about things. It's like, I don't. You and I probably haven't talked that much about foundationism, but in the foundationist side, this is the thing. These are the things we talk about. If we're in a culture war, okay, what does culture mean? Agriculture, cultivate means you have to grow things.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and if you and there's no better way to kind of to get to a better relationship with your fellow human being than to build something together, because what you build together, you're more likely to stand and defend together and fight for together.
And you build it together, you know how strong it is or how vulnerable it is,
Yes,
right?
sir.
And it
Yes, sir.
seems like we were occupying a world where we were just told that there were these foundations or maybe these pillars all around
Yes.
us, right? That
Yes.
other people above us have said they're there, you don't need to worry, you're protected.
That's right.
And then it turns out they were all made of polystyrene, basically.
That's
They
right.
just fell apart, they crumbled.
Well, and the real foundations underneath us are things we neglected. Well, you can't neglect those things. I mean,
Yeah,
if you're a homeowner, you know that you just
yeah,
there's certain things you have to attend to all the time. That's the
yeah,
nature of
yeah,
things. And so we
exactly.
we just we got comfortable. Our civilization was a victim of its own success. We lost our religion, and it wasn't necessary, because we could tell each other different stories to kind of keep away the cold and the dark and what
Yeah,
have you. Okay, fine. All right. Well, now the darkness has confronted us in a
yeah,
different form. Okay, and the wild beasts that wanted to tear us apart, from outside the compound, now want to tear us apart from inside the compound. Okay, switch up, you know,
mm,
but it's the same problem. Okay, and most of the tools and the operating systems we have to deal with those things, to contend with those ideas, is what I'm saying. Our centuries old. They're there. They're all there. They're all right. We have religion. We have the stories. We have traditions. We have fairy tales. We have myths.
mm,
They're telling.
storytelling.
Yes,
Yeah,
they're telling us
story.
about. Right.
But
Right.
but I think reclaim storytelling, because
Yes, sir.
it's been used to manipulate and I feel very much like it's been used to make us forget things when it should make us remember things. That's what
That's
stories
right.
are supposed to be there for. I
Yes.
had a
Yes.
thought. I mean, I don't have time at the moment to do anything like this, but I said to my wife the other day, you know what I'd love to do if I was going to set up any kind of little club or society? I'd love to just get some people together, like maybe once a month, light a fire, sit around, and just everyone has to tell a story,
Yes.
either made up themselves or they could read a passage or something. But I just like get for thousands of years that was what people did. They sat around and they told
Told stories.
stories,
Right.
and it's such an important part of who we are, what makes us different to every other life form.
That's right.
This ability to tell stories, and that's something we got to get back, and not allow it to be used um,
As a weapon against us.
as a weapon against us. Because I guess this is the thing: in an age where everybody every evening gathered around a fire and told a story, everyone had to be a storyteller.
Yes.
I think that is so vital. Now, most people aren't. They don't even try because they just consume the stories.
That's right.
That's all they do. They sit down and they have the stories projected at them. And you think, no, there is something really integral, really vital to the human experience in knowing how to tell a story. I think it's something that I guess I tell stories visually, and I think having any kind of understanding of storytelling, of narrative, of how it works, is one of the things that it has enabled people to see through what's going on, right?
Hmm.
Because we've been fed a narrative, but if you understand something of the mechanics of narrative, you can tell when one is false, right? And you can see through it and see the real one behind.
That's
You
right.
know,
That's right.
go,
And what's interesting is you talked about the age when everyone was a storyteller.
yeah.
We've professionalized certain things beyond what they will bear, right?
Yes, yes,
So, right. So we've professionalized storytelling. That's a problem. We've professionalized common sense, you
yeah,
know, right? So it's like, well, why are you asking these questions? You're not a scientist. I don't have to be a scientist. I have common sense.
mm,
I can use, my God-given reason, and I can reason about what you said to me, and I can reason that it doesn't hold together, right?
right, yeah,
And so this is maybe all of that starts with the story. It starts with sitting around the fire, and anyone gets to come up and say, "Okay, I have a story."
yeah.
And the only requirement is that these stories be our stories. They have to be true. They can't be lies. That's the only thing it can be. You can tell any story you want as long as it's not a lie.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And then and speaking of lies, something struck me that when you were talking earlier about your kind of summary ejection from Telegraph, the idea
Mm,
that I started thinking that that's the power of truth, even if it's very small. Even if it's the idea of this small grain of something that's irreducible, that means something, and that's so potent, okay, that when
yeah.
it's inside the creature made of lies, okay, it has to spew you out because it can't deal with you. As small as you're just one guy in this giant edifice, right? And it's like, well, we can't have this one guy around. This one guy who draws pictures. We just can't have him around.
Yeah, I
you
I
know?
did. Yeah, I did get a bit. There was a bit of that. I did get the impression of that. It was like almost like it got to a point where they were sort of saying, seriously, you're still not going to toe the line.
Hmm.
You're still going to, cling on to your precious principles. And like
Right.
everyone else is doing it. Everyone else has shut up about the vaccine.
Right. What's your
Why
problem?
can't you just do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it became, yeah, it became a problem, I guess.
That shows how potent the truth can be. It starts to dissolve lies just by being in proximity to them,
Mm,
just by being around. You know what I'm saying? That's nuts, kind of. That's you don't have to
yeah.
throw you don't have to throw it particularly hard. You just have to let it sit there because it doesn't require anything to kind of maintain itself. It just is. The lies have to be maintained constantly. It's this constant effort. The truth just is there. And so that's what I think is what when I get discouraged sometimes, I think about how panicked certain types get just when the truth is around. You think,
Yeah.
I mean, think about what it means for the Telegraph to get rid of you. Everyone else was on the other side. I
Yeah.
mean, Jesus
Yeah.
Christ, you got billions of dollars worth of big pharma. You got all the network media. You got all the politicians. You got all everybody. Jesus, you can't stand my little opinion, really?
What's quite funny now is they've started to bring out articles, I've noticed, decrying the way in which people who stood against all this stuff were smeared and abused.
Yes,
You
yes.
know,
Let's have a
and
vaccine. Let's have a COVID amnesty. Have you
yeah,
seen that one?
amnesty thing, and they're saying, no, of course we haven't had everyone who pushed this stuff deserves something, right? This is what the Telegraph was saying. They were like, the people who called for lockdowns and these measures, they can't just walk away and expect us to forget about it. They deserve some kind of consequence.
The Telegraph is saying that now, huh?
Yeah, they're saying it. And I'm sat there thinking, okay, well, at the time while they were doing it, I said they might deserve verbal abuse, and you sacked me for it.
Right.
So if they don't even deserve mean words said to them, what have you got in mind? What do you mean? You know?
Wow. Yeah, people are. I mean, it's such an interesting time to live in. When I saw the thing about COVID amnesty, I thought, well, that's as close to a mea culpa as we're going to get from these people.
Probably, sadly, yeah.
Let's all just forgive and forget.
It's what they're doing now with the Hancock thing. Matt Hancock has gone into the jungle as a celebrity, and it's the same kind of thing. It's they put him in there, and then they get him to apologize for precisely the wrong stuff.
Yes.
They confront him about the fact that he broke the rules, right? I said to somebody last night, don't ask him. It's not the rule breaking, it's the rule making that's the crime.
That's right.
And that's what nobody will confront these people for. And they know this. They know that if they can ask forgiveness for the wrong stuff, people will forget. People will just move on. They'll think that's the end of it.
Yes.
Please forgive me for grabbing a woman's ass in my office and having an affair.
Yeah.
Nobody then goes, oh yeah, but what about the fact that you stripped everyone of their freedom and killed hundreds of thousands of people through the measures?
Yeah.
They don't. Because most people want it to be over. This is the problem. They want to draw a line under it, and it's this kind of sick, twisted thing where our oppressors go on television and basically say, feel sorry for us. Now,
right.
We're the victims.
That's right.
It's another psychological twisting they do. It's so much of this has been actually, I was thinking the other day, so much of this has been, even those of us who are completely aware and see it for what it is, we've been forced to debate the wrong things.
Yes.
We've been forced to argue stuff that really at the end of the day doesn't matter. And it still happens to me. Sometimes you get drawn into these arguments about testing or masks or something. You always end up at the same place thinking, you know what, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter, even if you're right about what you're claiming, which you're not.
Yeah.
The fundamental point remains that like everything you're doing is bonkers.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like if I said to you, the pest control people came to my house, yesterday, and they told me I've got woodworm everywhere. Right, it's in all my rafters and beams, and the whole place is riddled with it. They said it's an emergency, right, and I've got to do something about it. And they said the only thing I can do is lock myself and my family in my house and set fire to it. Okay. Right. Now you say to me, Bob, you can't do that. It's completely insane. And I respond by going, whoa, whoa, whoa. What are you talking about? Last time I checked, you're not a woodworm expert. Neither am I. Okay, I've got a piece of paper here from the company saying I've got woodworm in my house. Are you saying they're lying? Are you a woodworm denier? And also, if I set fire to my house, obviously the woodworm will go. So do you not think, and anyway, before you know it, you're caught up in an argument with me about the existence or non-existence of woodworm.
That's right.
Or the effects of extreme fire on woodworm. Or you might start trying to point out to me how much money these companies make and their history and who funds them and stuff. And it's like, none of that's relevant. None of it has any effect at all on your original point that what I'm proposing to do is insane.
It's insane, yeah. Well, this is why bringing back you could say spiritual, but I prefer to say theological understanding of things is so important. some time ago, I began to understand that people didn't care about charts and graphs. I personally decided not to get into arguments on Twitter or anywhere else involving
Yes.
charts and graphs about the
Right.
great viral freakout, because
Good
what
move.
what I started to see was that people, because I was getting my numbers. I wasn't searching the kind of the fever swamps of the internet. I was going to the epidemiologists who were doing the actual work behind the scenes that never made it to the, and I said, well, wait a minute, like I know how to read an IFR histogram. Hang on a second, this doesn't hang together. Look at what look at what the CDC is saying. People didn't care about that because they had a different fundamental conception of things. And I began to realize that even the idea of proof is downstream from your fundamental philosophy of things, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, if I the analogy I like to use is if you say that I should invest in a certain stock in the stock market, right? You may come and you may show me charts and graphs and how this stock performs and what have you, and the profit and loss of the company and so on and so forth. But if I'm a Christian, for example, and I believe that I'm an Orthodox Christian, I believe that playing in the stock market is like gambling, it's like a usury and it's a sin,
Yes.
right? Then your charts and graphs don't prove anything to me. They are downstream of my fundamental concept of what I should and should not be doing. And so that's I think some of the most important work we have to do just as human beings with each other, is we have to get back to some coherent set of fundamental concepts. We have to redevelop a fundamental philosophy of things and a fundamental philosophy of each other. That's the purpose religion can serve.
I think, yeah, that for sure. But that little analogy made me think as well. I thought you were going in a slightly different direction. I think this is maybe interesting as well. What I thought you were going to say was, you could present me with these graphs and figures and advise me to invest in a certain company, right? Get stocks. But what I might say is, at the end of the day, this is just scribbles on a piece of paper. What I'm going to do is actually go to the offices and meet these people and watch them work and see what they actually do, get to know them before I decide to actually invest in it. Because you know what? You could fake this stuff. Anyone could write anything down if they're paid enough money to do so. And this is another problem we've got.
Yes,
right
yes,
now, is that people will go out and experience the world, look around them. They'll see. So in the initial phase, no one was ill. They didn't see anyone who was ill. Right? No one was dropping dead. Yet they'd go home and put on their television, and the scientists would hold up a graph that said thousands of people are dying, and people would start to say, "Oh, I must be mistaken. Then my observations must no longer be reliable."
Right.
And then it flipped. The opposite happened with the injections, where everyone started to know people who were getting sick or who were dying suddenly. It's happening all around them now, and yet they put on the news. And a scientist says, "Look at these figures. It's not happening.
Right.
It's not." And they substitute that's the guide for their reality now, not what they're actually seeing. And you think, we have to stop this. It's so dangerous. We've got to get back to people relying on what they actually see and hear and experience.
Yes. No, that's this is I've noticed that again. It's the professionalization of common sense. It's like your observation can't be trusted. And again, this is part of our debased and degraded relationship with science in the first place, because science, the original point of science was that it was democratic, so to speak, in that as long as you had the money to outfit a laboratory, if you could observe things and take good notes and ask interesting questions, you could be a natural philosopher. You could be a scientist.
Yes.
And something changed when we got this big hulking structure that kind of sucks up government money and kind of spits out scientists and literature and what have you. And it depends it depends on this kind of almost like a religious submission to it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what our kind of scientific establishment has become, as opposed to people trying to reason honestly about the world and to find out what is so, right? So,
But then
yeah.
I don't know if you find this, but so many people seem to think that it's doing that, using reason and coming to your own conclusions about things is like a special privilege.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
I've had this quite a lot with various aspects of this, where people say, "Oh yeah, but we have to go along with things because we're not special." I
Right.
say, what the hell do you mean you're not special? Like if you're born with a brain and the ability to use it, it's not special. It's what you're supposed to do. You're meant to figure things out for yourself.
Yeah.
And there's this weird thing. I don't know how long it's been going on for, really. I mean, I hadn't really struck me before, but it turns out there are all these people who think it's like there's only a select group
Yes.
of beings alive who are allowed to reason and form opinions and have principles and things and say no to stuff. It's very odd.
Yeah, that's right. Well, this is what's interesting about what you said. I think there's an element of class prejudice to it.
Yes, maybe.
You know,
Yeah.
I think here, if we see I would guess that it's much more kind of affluent. Certainly here, the affluent coastal cities are the ones who were much more, with a couple of exceptions, much more into following going along with the great viral freak out, you know.
Mm.
And I think if I think about it, it may have been that way for a while. I'm thinking back to this German doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis, who worked
Right.
at Vienna General Hospital, and he's been dubbed the savior of mothers because at the time, this was in the 1800s, I believe. And a lot of women, the profession of medicine was really kind of getting going in the West. But a lot of women, pregnant women at Vienna General Hospital, were falling ill and dying
Right.
out of what they call childbed fever. And ordinary people, and people like midwives, and those and grandmothers and people like that knew that going to the hospital was bad for you if you were going to have a baby.
Yes.
And all the professionals, of course, said, "Don't be ridiculous. We're people of science here. Come on, look around you. This is Vienna in the 1800s. You know what I'm saying? Get with the times, okay?
Yeah.
Never mind your stupid old wives' tales and your Christian mythology and all that business.
Yeah.
The hospital is the place to be." Now, of course, it turned out that they were having I believe that it was they were falling ill to hemolytic strep infections. And they were falling,
Okay.
and these pregnant women who were giving birth at Vienna General were dying. And Ignaz Semmelweis, notorious science denier, bucked the establishment and said, "You know something? Doctors who deliver babies, between dissecting dead bodies
Right.
and delivering babies,
Yeah.
they should maybe wash their hands."
Oh yeah. I've heard this. I didn't know the name, but yeah, I've heard this before. About
Yeah,
the
right.
guy who just suddenly suggested washing hands.
Washing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you all had another science denier named Joseph Lister. Similar principle. In his example, it was called ward fever, but same kind of thing. He said, "Well, wait a minute. Yeah, these surgeons, you need to wash your hands between patients." And of course, everyone said, "Well, don't be ridiculous, Joseph Lister. Everyone knows that disease is a consequence of bad odors in the air, or
Right.
poor breeding.
Yes.
If your ancestral lineage isn't good enough, you're one of these people that get sick, whatever." But the point is that there's maybe always been, especially since the modern era, this kind of class tension between people who have come to know things empirically all the same, okay, but maybe didn't write as many things down as the professionals did. You know, the midwives, the wise women of the village, and so on and so forth, and the professional establishment. And it's not to say that everyone has to go back and live in a village and have a wise woman, but it's to say we have to understand that your senses, there's nothing special about your senses as opposed to my senses. The point of science is that you and I can both observe the same thing.
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
but you know, we could go on forever about that, because I think there's, again, another relationship that has been debased and degraded. We think science is a collection of answers when it's merely a collection of techniques for asking questions. You know?
Right. Yes, exactly. And I think we've also forgotten that there are certain questions that science isn't interested in asking.
That's
right,
correct.
in the first place, that are nevertheless really important questions. And a lot of those questions are asked, and some of them answered by religion. You know, that's another thing people should understand. But I mean, I guess that comes back to your thing of like, it's not a scientific question.
It's not a scientific question, and
It's not just science doesn't have all the answers; it doesn't have all the questions.
Well, and it's structurally. I mean, look, science is structural and able to answer certain kinds of questions anyway. It can't answer questions where where you can't pick a point in time and do a before and after. Right? You want to do a scientific experiment, you take a set of conditions, you pick a point in time, you perform the experiment, then you look at the conditions after. There's a before and there's an after. You observe the two and you start to come to conclusions. Okay, well, what happened first is not a question science can answer, because there was no before. You can't run an experiment. And what will happen last is also a question that science structurally is unable to answer. You know, and we can accept that without rejecting science, for God's sake. We can say, listen, yes, certainly the scientific method has yielded a number of excellent things for us. Wonderful. But at the end of the day, again, it's mistaking the instrument for the work. Science is the instrument. It's not the work.
Yes. Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
So man.
Yeah.
Well, I can't, as I'm looking at my watch, I can't believe how generous you've been with your time.
I didn't even realize how long we've been speaking. So
it's madness. I wanna thank you again. I know you don't do interviews very often, but I hope you'll consider coming back and doing another talk with me.
I would definitely like to do that again, and I've wanted to do this one for some time. I know we've been going back and forth for a while, and ever since I heard you on Delingpole, which is long time ago.
It's been a while, yeah.
I thought, I would like to have a chat. So we'll definitely do it again. It's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.